Before beginning the story, I'd like to say a big thank you for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading alternate history-related stories every single day. If that sounds good, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a whole lot when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. Harlan moved into the house across the street on a Saturday in early March, and the first thing I noticed was the truck. It was the same make and model as mine, same year, same color, a faded green that the manufacturer had called something like forest or pine, but was really just the particular shade of green that working trucks turn after enough sun and road salt. I had bought mine used 6 years ago and put 60,000 miles on it since. His looked like it had about the same. I noticed it, the way you notice a thing that is slightly too close to another thing. The mild cognitive friction of something that doesn't quite fit the expected distance between two objects. I mentioned it to my girlfriend Nora that evening, and she said it wasn't that strange, that it was a common truck, that I was the kind of person who noticed things and then made more of them than necessary. She said this affectionately. It was a known quality. I let it go. It was a truck. People had the same truck. My name is Dex Collon, and I've been doing tile and flooring work for going on 14 years. I run a small operation, just me and one part-time guy named Ortega, and we stay busy enough that I'm usually out of the house by 7 and back by 5 or 6 depending on the job. I've lived on my current street for 4 years. It's a quiet block, the kind where people wave from driveways and learn each other's rough schedules without ever having a direct conversation about them. Harlan introduced himself the following Monday morning. I was loading material into the truck bed when he came across the street with his hands in his jacket pockets, unhurried, and introduced himself with a first name and a handshake. He was about my height, my build. He had dark hair going grey at the temples, in the same pattern mine was going grey, which I noticed and then told myself was not something worth noting because lots of people went grey at the temples. He said he was in contracting. I told him I was in tile and flooring. He nodded like that made sense to him in some way he didn't elaborate on. And then he went back across the street and got in his truck and left for work at the same time I left for work. I sat at a red light 2 blocks away and looked at my own hands on the steering wheel and told myself I was the kind of person who noticed things and made more of them than necessary. The details accumulated the way details do when you're paying attention to something, slowly, and then all at once. He worked the same hours I worked. He came home within 15 minutes of when I came home, close enough that we were sometimes pulling into our respective driveways at the same time, giving each other the nod that neighbors give each other on their way inside. He took his coffee on the front porch in the morning, the same way I took mine, same side of the porch, same general duration. I told myself these were the rhythms of a working man with a similar job, that I was pattern matching where there was no real pattern. Then I saw his arms. It was a warm afternoon in late March, and he was unloading material from his truck in a short-sleeved shirt. I was doing the same on my side of the street. I wasn't staring, but I was close enough that I could see clearly, and what I saw was a tattoo on his left forearm in the same location as mine, the same general shape, a design I'd had done 11 years ago at a shop 2 cities over on a trip I'd taken alone. I stood next to my truck and looked at his arm and then down at my own arm and back. He finished unloading and went inside without looking over. I stood in my driveway for a while after that. I started watching more deliberately after that, which I'm not proud of, but which felt necessary in the way that picking at something feels necessary even when you know it won't help. The scar was next, right hand, between the thumb and index finger, the kind of scar that comes from a specific kind of tool accident. I had one exactly there from an incident with a wet saw 8 years ago. 3 stitches, not serious, but permanent. I saw his when he was checking his mailbox one afternoon, close enough that I could see the scar clearly. Same hand, same location, same character. I told Nora about it that night. I told her carefully, in the way you tell someone something you know sounds unreasonable, front-loading the acknowledgement that it sounded unreasonable. She listened, and then she went quiet in a way that was different from her usual quiet. She said that a woman had moved in with Harlan over the weekend. She said she'd seen her from the upstairs window. I asked what she looked like. Nora took a moment before she answered. She said she looked like her. Not identical, not a copy, but close enough that she'd stood at the window for a long time trying to figure out if she was imagining it. We sat with that together for a while. I want to be precise about what I thought at this point, because I think the order of understanding matters. My first instinct was something like targeted harassment, that this man had researched me specifically and was doing something deliberate and threatening. My second instinct, which arrived fast behind the first, was that this explanation required a level of effort and specificity that didn't hold together logically. You couldn't research the exact pattern of someone's graying temples, or replicate a scar from a tool accident, or find a woman who resembled someone's girlfriend and move her across the street as a prop. My third instinct was the one I sat with, the one that had the uncomfortable quality of things that are true before you want them to be. He wasn't copying me. He was me, running slightly offset, a version that had taken different roads to arrive at roughly the same place. The tattoo was his because he'd made the same choice I'd made, probably in the same period of his life, probably for the same half-articulated reason. The scar was his because the same kind of work did the same kind of damage to a person over time. The woman was with him because whatever version of Nora existed in his world had ended up with whatever version of him existed there. The same gravitational pull producing the same orbit. He wasn't imitating my life. He was living a parallel version of it that had drifted close enough that the two were overlapping. The question I couldn't yet answer was whether he knew. He knew. I understood that the morning I finally crossed the street, it was a Sunday, early, the kind of quiet morning where sound carries and the street is empty enough that crossing it feels more deliberate than it usually does. I'd been awake since 5. I'd made my coffee and taken it to the porch and watched his house for a while. Watched the light in his kitchen that told me he was up and had been for some time. I crossed the street and knocked. He answered the door before I'd finished knocking, like he'd been standing on the other side of it. He looked at me with an expression I recognized because I knew every version of it, every permutation and context it appeared in, because it was my expression. It was the face I made when I'd been waiting for something difficult and it had finally arrived, and there was nothing to do now but get through it. He stepped back and let me in. His kitchen was similar to mine in the way everything about him was similar to me. Same general logic, different specific choices. He poured me coffee without asking, which was the right call, and we sat at his kitchen table, and he looked at his mug and waited. I asked him how long he'd known. He said since before he moved in. He said he'd found the street before he'd found the house, that he'd been looking for me specifically, or looking for this version of me, and that the house across the street coming available had seemed like something he shouldn't ignore. I asked him about his world. He told me. He said 8 months ago I had been on a job site, a commercial flooring installation in a building downtown, and there had been an accident involving a scaffold on the floor above. He said it had been fast and that I hadn't suffered, and I could tell from the way he said it that he'd told himself that many times and wasn't sure anymore whether it was true or just necessary. He said the months after that had been the kind of months that don't resolve. He said Nora, his Nora, had held together with the particular strength of someone who doesn't let themselves fall apart until they're alone, and that watching her hold together had been one of the harder things he'd experienced because there was nothing he could do with the knowledge of what it was costing her. He said his world had started going wrong after I died. Not catastrophically, just the texture of daily life going grey and resistant, the way everything gets slightly harder when the thing that made it easy is gone. I asked him what he wanted. He looked up from his mug for the first time since we'd sat down. His eyes were mine, same colour, same slight downward pull at the outer corners that I'd never particularly liked in photographs, but had long since stopped thinking about. He said he didn't want anything unreasonable. He said he knew he couldn't stay. He knew that the longer he stayed, the more the two worlds would press against each other and the stranger things would get, and he didn't want to do that to this street or these people. He said he'd been sitting across from my life for 3 weeks, and that had been both better and worse than he'd expected. Better because I was there, recognizably there, going about the ordinary business of a life he understood completely. Worse for the same reason. I asked him about the woman upstairs, his Nora. He said she'd crossed with him. He said she didn't fully understand what had happened or where they were, that he'd told her they were relocating for a fresh start, and she'd believed him because she'd wanted badly to believe something. He said that was the part he was least proud of. We sat in the quiet kitchen while the street outside stayed empty, and the morning light moved across his table the same way it moved across mine. I told him he had to leave. I said it without anger, without accusation, in the same tone I'd want someone to use with me if the positions were reversed, which they were, which was the strangest part of the whole conversation. He nodded. He said he'd have them out by the end of the week. Then he asked for one thing. He asked if he could sit on my porch with me for an hour. Just that, he said. He wasn't asking for anything that wasn't already mine. He just wanted to sit on the porch of a version of the life he'd lost, in the company of the version of himself who still had it for 1 hour. He said he thought it might make the leaving easier. I looked at him across the table for a long moment. Then I told him to come over at 7. Nora was at her sister's that evening, which I was grateful for in a way I couldn't fully explain. I set 2 chairs on the porch, and I was out there with my coffee when he crossed the street at 7 exactly. Because, of course, he was on time, because I was always on time. And he came up the porch steps and sat down in the second chair, and that was that. The street was quiet. A neighbor 2 houses down walked a dog. A car passed slowly. The light went from gold to grey, the way it does in early spring when the days are getting longer but haven't gotten warm enough yet to make you feel it. I looked at him once, directly, and then looked back at the street, because looking at him directly for too long had a quality I didn't have a name for, like looking at something that shouldn't be able to reflect light and finding that it does. I thought about what I would want if I was sitting in his chair. If I had spent 8 months carrying what he was carrying and had found my way to this porch somehow, what would I want the hour to contain? I didn't think he wanted conversation. I think he'd had enough conversation in the last 8 months to last considerably longer than a lifetime. I think what he wanted was the porch and the quiet street and the ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening and the specific comfort of being near a version of himself that was still intact. So I didn't say much, and neither did he. At one point, a light came on in the upstairs window of my house, and I realized Nora had come home early, and he saw it too, and looked at it for a long moment before looking back at the street. I didn't say anything about it. He didn't ask. When the hour was done, he stood up and said, "Thank you." He said it simply, without making more of it than it was. I told him to take care of himself. The absurdity of saying that to your own face in the dark was not lost on either of us. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost, but not quite. And then he crossed the street and went inside, and the light in his kitchen came on. They were gone by Thursday. I watched the moving truck from my porch in the morning, and the process was the same as any moving day. Boxes and furniture, and the specific entropy of a household in transit. His Nora directed things efficiently, the way Nora directed things, and I watched her from across the street and felt a complicated sadness that I haven't been able to fully sort through since. By midday, the house was empty. By evening, someone had already called about the listing. I haven't told Nora the full version of it. I've told her parts, the parts that stay close to the ground, and she's listened with the focused skepticism she applies to things she half believes, but isn't ready to fully accept. I think she'll get there. I think some part of her already knows, the same way I knew before I was ready to say it out loud. What I think about now, most often, is the hour on the porch. I think about what it means to lose the ordinary shape of your own life and then find a version of it still intact somewhere else, and what you do with the hour you're given inside it. Whether you try to hold on to it, or whether you just sit there and let the ordinary evening move through you on its way to somewhere else. He just sat there. He let it move through. I think about that, and I think it was the right call. I think I would have done the same.